There's a question that's been busing in political circles, whispered in strategy rooms, and debated on morning cable shows, and most people don't understand why it even matters. But it does. It matters quite a bit. Donald Trump recently has made a peculiar accusation. He said that Joe Biden's executive orders, certain ones anyway, aren't actually what they claim to be. They're fake, he says. Illegitimate. And when you first hear this, you might think, okay, that's just the usual political theater, the kind of thing you expect to hear during a contentious election cycle. But if you look closer, if you really examine what's happening here, you start to see something else entirely. Because this isn't just about executive orders. It never is. It's about power. It's about what power means in a moment of institutional uncertainty. It's about who gets to define the rules and who gets to decide what's real and what's not. Most people miss this. They see the headline, they absorb the talking point, and they move on. But the people who understand how political power actually works, they're paying attention. They're watching carefully, because they know that when a former president starts questioning the legitimacy of his successor's executive orders, something deeper is being set in motion. This is the story of that moment. It's the story of why Trump is making these accusations, what he hopes to achieve, and what it reveals about the state of American politics right now. It's about the weaponization of executive authority itself, and it's about a battle over something more fundamental than any single policy decision. It's about the very nature of presidential power. So let's start with the most basic question: why now? Why is this accusation surfacing at this particular moment in time? The answer is more strategic than you might think. To understand this, we need to step back and understand what an executive order actually is, because most Americans have a vague sense that they exist. They've heard the term, but they don't necessarily understand the mechanism, what it is, where it comes from, and why presidents use it. An executive order is at its core a written directive from the president to the executive branch of government. It's how a president tells the agencies, the departments, the federal bureaucracy to do something. It's based on the president's constitutional authority as the chief executive. The Constitution gives the president power to take care that the laws be faithfully executed. That's the legal justification. Now, an executive order isn't supposed to create law. That's Congress's job. The legislature makes laws, the president executes them. In theory, that's how it works. But over time, and particularly in the modern era, executive orders have become something more flexible. They've become a tool for ambitious presidents to reshape policy without waiting for congressional approval. They're faster, they're less dependent on legislative consensus. And once you understand that, you understand why they're so politically powerful. President after president has used them this way. Eisenhower used executive orders to enforce desegregation. Kennedy used them to establish the Peace Corps. Obama used them to reshape environmental policy, to defer deportations, to shift regulations. Trump used them to reshape immigration enforcement and tax policy. This is the modern presidency. A president uses executive orders to move policy forward on their priorities. But here's what matters. Executive orders aren't infinitely powerful. They can be challenged in court. They can be reversed by the next president. They operate within constitutional bounds, at least in theory, and there's a particular vulnerability built into that structure. If you can successfully argue that an executive order violates the Constitution or exceeds the president's authority, you can undermine it entirely. This is what Trump understands, and this is why his accusation that Biden's orders are fake is more than just rhetorical posturing. It's the opening move in a longer game. So why is Trump making this accusation now? What's changed? What's the strategic calculus here? The answer lies in understanding where we are in the political cycle. Biden is president. The Democrats still hold the Senate. But in the House, Republicans have the majority. It's divided government. And in divided government, executive orders become even more important because they're one of the few ways a president can move policy forward without the legislature. But here's where it gets interesting. Trump isn't just making these accusations in a vacuum. Reports indicate that his team has been quietly coordinating with allies in Congress, building a legal strategy around challenging Biden's executive orders. The goal isn't just to complain about them. The goal is to delegitimize them, to create political space for Republicans in Congress to act against them, to set up legal challenges that could reach the courts. Think about what this means. If Trump can successfully convince a significant portion of the American public that Biden's executive orders are illegitimate, that they're not properly issued, that they exceed presidential authority, that they're somehow fake, then he's accomplished something significant. He's shifted the political narrative. He's made it acceptable, politically, to move against them. And there's a secondary calculation here, too. Trump is thinking about 2024. He's thinking about what happens if he wins. If he can establish the principle that his predecessor's executive orders were illegitimate, then he creates a precedent. He can point back and say, see, Biden's orders were fake. Mine won't be. It's about establishing justification for his own future use of executive power. But the timing also matters for another reason. Biden has signed an unusually high number of executive orders, particularly on environmental policy, on regulatory matters, on issues where he knew Congress wouldn't move with him. Trump's team has identified the ones that are most vulnerable, the ones most likely to be challenged in court, the ones that press the bounds of executive authority the furthest. So the accusation isn't random, it's targeted, it's strategic, and it's emerging in a moment when Trump is thinking about power, how to challenge it, how to undermine it, and how to reclaim it. To really understand this story, though, we need to talk about the law, because Trump's accusation, while framed in inflammatory language, is actually pointing to something real. There is a genuine legal question at stake here. The Constitution is, in many ways, elegantly vague on executive power. It says the president shall take care that the laws be faithfully executed. But what does that mean exactly? Where does executive power end and legislative power begin? It's a question that has animated constitutional law for centuries. The Supreme Court has attempted to draw some boundaries. There's a famous framework established in a 1952 case called Youngstown Sheet and Tube Co. v. Sawyer that divides presidential action into three categories. When the president acts with congressional authorization, their power is at its maximum. When the president acts without congressional authorization but Congress hasn't forbidden it, their power is in a twilight zone. It depends on the circumstances. And when the president acts against the expressed will of Congress, their power is at its lowest ebb. Most of Biden's executive orders, if challenged, would probably fall into that middle category. He didn't get congressional authorization for them, but Congress didn't explicitly forbid them either. So whether they're constitutional depends on how a court interprets presidential authority. Now, Trump's argument that they're fake is crude legal language. What he's really saying, or what his lawyers are really saying, is that these orders exceed presidential authority, that they venture too far into territory that belongs to Congress, that they represent a president overreaching. And here's the thing, he's not entirely wrong to raise the question. Courts have struck down executive orders before. Courts have found them to exceed presidential authority. It's happened. So Trump isn't inventing a legal theory out of whole cloth. He's identifying what he sees as a vulnerability. But there's a political calculation embedded in the legal strategy too. By framing these orders as fake, Trump is trying to delegitimize them in the court of public opinion before they ever reach an actual court. He's trying to create a political consensus that they're illegitimate. Because if he can do that, it becomes harder for Biden to defend them. It becomes harder for Congress to protect them. It becomes a political liability. This is how modern constitutional battles work. They're not just legal arguments. They're political narratives wrapped in legal language. If you step back and look at this moment as part of a longer arc, you start to see something. This isn't the first time Trump has questioned the legitimacy of his predecessor's action. It's part of a pattern. When Obama was president, Trump was one of the most prominent voices questioning the legitimacy of Obama's presidency itself, the birther conspiracy, the claims about where Obama was born, the doubts about his citizenship. Looking back now, it's clear what was happening. Trump was delegitimizing the office. He was casting doubt on Obama's authority to act. Then Trump became president, and he used executive orders extensively. He issued them on immigration, on environmental policy, on trade. And when courts blocked them, he protested. He said the courts were being unfair. He questioned the judge's motives. He was, in his own way, delegitimizing the constraints on executive power. Now Biden is president, and Trump is back to questioning legitimacy. He's questioning Biden's orders. He's questioning the basis of Biden's authority. And analysts are starting to recognize the pattern. This is a consistent strategy. It's about power, about who has it, how they use it, and whether they have the right to use it. What's notable this time, though, is the sophistication of the assault. Trump isn't just making vague accusations. He's coordinating with lawyers. He's identifying specific executive orders that have the weakest legal foundations. He's building a case. He's laying groundwork for actual court challenges. Sources close to Republican strategy confirm that there's a coordinated effort underway. Multiple executive orders have been flagged for potential legal challenge. Republican House members have been briefed on the strategy. It's not ad hoc, it's coordinated, it's strategic, and the goal is becoming clearer: undermine Biden's ability to govern through executive action, force him to rely more heavily on Congress, which he controls less, slow down his policy agenda, and establish in the court of public opinion and actual courts that his executive authority is questionable. But here's what most political commentary misses. This isn't really about executive orders, it's about something deep. It's about whether we still have agreement on the basic rules of the game. In a healthy democracy, there's a shared understanding. The president gets certain powers, Congress gets certain powers, courts enforce constitutional limits, and crucially, all sides accept the legitimacy of the other's actions, even when they disagree. You can fight about policy, you can challenge something in court, but you accept that the other person has the authority to act. What Trump is doing, what this pattern represents, is the gradual erosion of that consensus. By repeatedly questioning the legitimacy of his opponent's actions, by suggesting they're illegitimate or fake, Trump is asking Americans to stop accepting the basic rule. He's suggesting that perhaps executive orders issued by a president he opposes shouldn't be treated as legitimate. And this matters, because once you lose that consensus, things start to break down. If Republicans don't accept Biden's executive authority, why should Democrats accept a Republican president's authority? The game becomes purely about power. Who can do what to whom, and can we stop them? This is already happening at the state level in some cases. Republican governors are ignoring federal court orders. Democratic governors are ignoring federal enforcement actions. The consensus is fraying, and Trump's accusations about Biden's executive orders are part of that larger unraveling. They're not really about the substance of any particular policy. They're about delegitimization. They're about suggesting that the whole system is rigged, that the other side is cheating, that we can't trust the basic institutions anymore. This is dangerous because it has downstream consequences. If millions of Americans believe that Biden's executive orders are fake or illegitimate, then they become less willing to abide by the policies those orders establish. Enforcement becomes harder, implementation becomes harder. The whole machinery of government grinds slow, and politically it opens the door for even more aggressive action. If Trump ever regains power, and if he's successfully established in people's minds that executive orders can be fake, then what does that mean for the constraints on his own power? What rules apply to him? So what happens from here? How does this story play out? The most likely scenario is that several of Biden's executive orders end up in court. Republicans have identified targets, they're building legal cases, and some of those cases have genuine merit. They raise legitimate constitutional questions about the scope of executive authority. The courts will have to decide. Some orders will probably survive legal challenges. They'll be upheld as within presidential authority. Others might be struck down or modified. That's how the system is supposed to work. Courts balance power, they set boundaries, they arbitrate disputes, but the political dimension is more unpredictable. If Trump succeeds in convincing a significant portion of the American public that Biden's orders are fundamentally illegitimate, not just wrong policy but actually illegitimate, then we're in new territory. We're in a world where a former president's delegitimization campaign has effectively poisoned the well for an incumbent president's governing power. Reports from Democratic strategists indicate growing concern about this dynamic. They see what's happening, they see the coordinated effort to undermine executive authority, and they're worried that it could become a template for future political warfare. Whichever party is out of power can simply declare that the president's executive orders are illegitimate, build a legal strategy around it, and see if they can make it stick. In the medium term, we might see an escalation of this conflict. More litigation, more delegation of authority back to Congress, more gridlock. Because if executive orders become politically toxic, if they become the subject of constant delegitimization campaigns, then presidents will be less willing to use them. They'll try to get congressional authorization instead. But that's harder. That takes longer. It requires compromise. So what we're seeing now is a preview of what politics might look like in a more polarized, less trusting America, one where the rules themselves become contested, one where legitimacy is constantly questioned. When historians look back at this moment, I think they'll recognize it as significant, not because of any particular executive order, but because of what it represents: a deliberate, coordinated campaign to question the legitimacy of a president's governing authority. This is something new in recent American politics, at least in its explicit form. We've had intense partisan disagreements. We've had political warfare. But the suggestion that a president's actual exercise of constitutional authority is fake or illegitimate, that's a different register of conflict. Trump didn't invent this technique. Delegitimization campaigns are as old as politics itself, but he's refined it. He's made it a centerpiece of his political strategy, and he's doing it at a time when institutional trust is already fragile. When many Americans already doubt whether the system works, when many people already believe that the game is rigged, into that environment, Trump's accusation lands differently. For some people, it confirms what they already suspect. For others, it deepens their cynicism. The effect is compounding doubt. And here's what we need to understand. This is just one battle in a larger war over executive power. It's not new. This conflict has been building for decades. Presidents of both parties have expanded executive authority far beyond what the founders probably intended. Congress has allowed this. The courts have mostly allowed this. And now, as executive power has become more consequential, the battles over it are becoming more fierce. Trump's accusation about Biden's fake executive orders is just the most recent flashpoint. But it points to a larger reckoning that American democracy needs to have. What is executive power supposed to be? How much authority should a president actually have? When should Congress step in? What should the courts oversee? These are important questions, and they deserve serious debate, not just the political theater of delegitimization campaign. They deserve constitutional reasoning. They deserve both parties acknowledging that there's a real problem that needs solving. But instead, we're getting strategic warfare. We're getting each side trying to undermine the legitimacy of the other's action. We're getting a slow erosion of shared rules and shared understandings. The accusations about Biden's executive orders are a symptom of this larger illness. They're not the disease itself. The disease is the collapse of consensus about how power should be exercised. The disease is the politicization of the very rules that are supposed to constrain political power. And the only way to treat that disease is to rebuild that consensus, to get back to a point where we can disagree about policy without questioning each other's legitimacy to govern. To accept that the other side, even when we strongly oppose them, has the right to exercise the powers that the Constitution gives them. That's not impossible. It's been done before. American democracy has recovered from periods of intense polarization, but it requires something more than just political victory. It requires a conscious choice, by leaders and by citizens, to defend the system itself, even when we lose, to accept the rules, even when we don't like the outcome. Whether that choice is being made right now is an open question. What we can see clearly is that the alternative, a politics of pure delegitimization where no one accepts the other side's authority, leads somewhere darker. It leads to the unraveling of democratic norms. It leads to the weaponization of the government itself. Trump's accusations about Biden's executive orders are part of that unraveling. They're not the beginning of it, but they're a significant moment. They're a moment where we should pause and ask ourselves, what kind of democracy do we want? And are we doing the things necessary to preserve it?